I was 16 when my mother and Harry sat me down for a conversation that would change everything. I still remember that day so clearly. The awkward tension in the air, how they seemed more like coworkers delivering bad news than family. My mother looked nervous, but there was this strange determination in her eyes, like she had already made up her mind and was just going through the motions. They started by saying how things had become complicated now that the twins were here. Harry chimed in, trying to sound sympathetic, but failing miserably. He said something about how the expenses of raising 2 infants were adding up quickly, and how they were doing their best to make ends meet. I listened, nodding, assuming that this was just a regular family discussion. Then my mother dropped the bomb. "We think it's time for you to move out." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. Move out? I was 16, still in high school. Sure, I wasn't a little kid anymore, but I was nowhere near ready to live on my own. I told her that, hoping she'd realize how ridiculous it sounded. Instead, she looked at me with this forced patience, like I was the one being unreasonable. "We're not saying it to hurt you," she said, "but with 2 babies to care for, we just can't afford to support everyone under one roof." I tried to suggest alternatives. I told them I could get a part-time job, contribute to household expenses, whatever they needed. I didn't want to leave. Not like this, but my mother wasn't interested. That was when she said it, the line I'll never forget. "The twins deserved more than you." I don't think she realized how much that sentence stung. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was clear that I wasn't wanted. I had spent years being a part of her life, and now I was being pushed aside for her new family. She and Harry had already decided that my place in their lives was optional. They didn't kick me out immediately. Legally, they couldn't, but they made staying unbearable. Harry started bringing up the subject constantly, saying things like, "You're almost an adult, you'll be fine." My mother avoided me around the house, acting like I was a guest who had overstayed their welcome. I couldn't take it anymore. Eventually, I packed a bag and left. They didn't even try to stop me. No, "Where will you go?" Or "Are you okay?" Nothing. I went to my grandparents' house, the only place I could think of. They were horrified when I told them what happened. They let me stay with them, but they were elderly and couldn't support me financially. I had to grow up fast. Looking back, that day was when I realized my mother had made her choice. She had a new family now, and I wasn't part of it. I was just a leftover, and no matter how much I tried to reason with her, she had made it clear I didn't belong in her life anymore. Leaving home at 16 felt like stepping into a storm with no umbrella. I had my grandparents, and I'll always be grateful for them, but they were elderly and on fixed incomes. I knew they couldn't take care of me financially, and honestly, I didn't want to burden them more than I already was. They had already opened their doors when no one else would. It was up to me to figure out the rest. I got my first part-time job a few weeks after moving in. It wasn't glamorous. I was stocking shelves and cleaning up messes at a local grocery store. The pay was laughable, but it was something. My schedule was brutal. School during the day, work in the evenings, and homework late at night. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I still remember coming home so tired I'd collapse onto the couch, only to wake up and realize I hadn't even eaten dinner. At school, things weren't much easier. I kept my situation to myself because, honestly, who wants to be the kid whose mom kicked him out? But it wasn't hard for people to notice something was off. My clothes started to look worn, I didn't have money to hang out after class, and I wasn't exactly cheerful. Teachers started asking if I was okay. Friends would invite me over, and I'd make excuses because I didn't want to explain why I couldn't afford to bring snacks or pitch in for gas money. My grandparents did what they could to support me emotionally. They'd sit with me at the kitchen table after work and listen to me vent. My grandmother in particular had this way of making me feel like things would get better, even when I couldn't see how. But as much as they loved me, I knew they weren't in a position to take on my financial burdens. My grandfather's health wasn't great, and every month seemed like a balancing act just to cover their bills. When I started applying to colleges, I knew I was on my own. My mother didn't even return my calls when I asked if she could co-sign a student loan for me. Harry had the nerve to tell me, "We need to save for the twins' future, not dig ourselves into debt for you." So I turned to my uncle, who thankfully agreed to co-sign. That one gesture made everything else possible, but it also came with a promise. I wouldn't let him down. I entered college with loans hanging over my head and zero safety net. My first semester, I balanced a full course load and a part-time job. It was exhausting, but failing wasn't an option. I worked nights at a campus diner, flipping burgers and refilling coffee cups while studying during slow shifts. The tips weren't much, but they helped me buy textbooks and keep some food in my dorm room. Holidays were the hardest. While other students went home to their families, I stayed on campus or spent time with friends who pitied me enough to invite me over. My mother never called. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas. She didn't even show up for my high school graduation, let alone help me move into my dorm. It was as if I didn't exist to her anymore. By the time I graduated, I was tired in a way I didn't even know was possible. But I was proud too. Every late shift, every dollar saved, every sacrifice, it had all paid off. I had a degree, no major debt defaults, and most importantly, a future. My grandparents were there to cheer me on at my graduation, and I'll never forget how proud they looked. My mother, she didn't even send a card. Looking back, those years were some of the hardest of my life, but they also taught me what I was capable of. I learned that I could rely on myself even when no one else was there. I learned how to fight for what I wanted, even when the odds weren't in my favor. Most of all, I learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up when it matters. And for me, my grandparents and my uncle were the ones who showed up. Graduating college felt like crossing a finish line, but I quickly realized it was just the start of another race. The job market wasn't exactly forgiving, and my first position after graduation paid barely enough to keep me afloat. I was working as an entry-level analyst in a small company, and while it was a foot in the door, it didn't leave much room to breathe. Rent, groceries, student loan payments. It felt like I was constantly one unexpected expense away from losing everything. I lived in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. I'd sit at my kitchen table, if you could even call it that, eating instant noodles and thinking, this can't be it. This can't be what I worked so hard for. But I reminded myself that it was just the beginning. I had climbed one mountain and now it was time to tackle the next. My days were long and unrelenting. I'd get to the office early, stay late, and volunteer for tasks no one else wanted. I knew I had to make myself stand out because no one was going to hand me anything. My coworkers had connections, mentors, even families they could lean on. Me? I was just a kid from nowhere with no safety net. But I had something to prove, and that drove me. Over time, my hard work started paying off. I learned everything I could, often taking on responsibilities that were technically above my pay grade. It wasn't because I loved the job, I didn't, but I knew every skill I mastered and every project I completed would make me harder to overlook. My manager noticed, and after a couple of years, I got my first promotion. It wasn't a huge jump, but it felt like validation that I was on the right track. As my career progressed, so did my life outside of work. I was finally able to afford better food, replace my secondhand furniture, and save a little. Slowly but surely, I was building a life I could be proud of, and I did it all on my own. No phone calls to my mom asking for advice or support, no visits from Harry to check in on me. I was entirely self-made. And that fact carried a mix of pride and bitterness. There were moments, of course, when I thought about reaching out, not to reconcile, but to prove to them, my mother, Harry, anyone who doubted me, that I didn't need them. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the words my mother said when I was 16. The twins deserve more than you. That sentence haunted me and fueled me in equal measure. I didn't need her validation because I was creating my own. By my late 20s, I had moved to a mid-sized company with better pay and a clear path for growth. It was here that I started to feel like I was truly making it. The long hours and sacrifices were paying off. When I got my first management position at 30, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I looked back at the kid stocking shelves at a grocery store, at the teenager crashing on his grandparents' couch, and I thought, he wouldn't believe where we are now. But I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't post about it or share the news widely. I told a few close friends, my grandparents, and my uncle, the people who had supported me when no one else did. I had learned to keep my success quiet. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was just a defense mechanism. Either way, I didn't want to invite anyone into my life who had chosen to walk away when I needed them most. Years later, when my mother eventually found out about my success, it wasn't because I told her. She heard it through the grapevine, probably from my uncle. When she showed up on my doorstep demanding to talk, I realized something important. Success doesn't erase the past. I had worked hard, built a life, and achieved more than I ever thought I could. But when I looked at her standing there, I understood that no promotion or paycheck could undo what she had done. And that's when I knew I didn't owe her anything. It had been years since I'd even thought about my mother. By then, I was 33, working in a management position and finally living a life that felt stable. I kept my circle small, close friends, my grandparents, and my uncle, who had been the only family member willing to stand by me when things were rough. My mother, she was just a shadow from my past, or so I thought. One evening, out of nowhere, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was already cautious when I opened the door. There she was, standing on my doorstep, and behind her, Harry. They looked different, not the confident, self-assured couple I remembered from my teenage years. They looked tired, worn out, like life had been chewing them up and spitting them back out. Still, seeing them there made my stomach twist. "What are you doing here?" That was the first thing I managed to say. I didn't even invite them in, but my mother walked right past me like she still had some claim to my life. Harry followed behind her, mumbling something about wanting to talk. I didn't know why I let them stay. Maybe some small part of me hoped they were there to finally apologize, to acknowledge what they'd done all those years ago. But that hope was short-lived. They didn't waste much time getting to the point. My mother started by saying she'd heard about my success from my uncle, who thought it was time for us to reconnect. She said it like it was some kind of casual catch-up, as if she hadn't abandoned me for nearly 2 decades. Then she shifted gears, talking about how hard things had been for her and Harry. They'd started a business that failed, lost a lot of money, and were now struggling to keep up with expenses. And then came the real reason they were there. My half-brothers were preparing to go to college, and they needed my help to pay for it. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I owed them something. She even framed it as an opportunity for me to make amends for cutting her out of my life. I couldn't believe the audacity. I told them no, flat out. I wasn't rude, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. I reminded her that she had made her priorities clear years ago when she chose to kick me out. She didn't like that response. She started saying I was being selfish and ungrateful, that I was punishing her for things she did when she was under a lot of pressure. Then she brought up everything she had supposedly sacrificed to raise me, as if raising your own child is some extraordinary act of charity. Harry didn't say much during this. He just sat there looking at the floor, letting her do all the talking. When I pressed them on why they thought I owed them anything, my mother said, "You're successful now. It's not like it's a big deal for you to help your brothers." My brothers? I barely even knew them. I didn't blame them for any of this, but they weren't my responsibility. The more she talked, the angrier I got. It wasn't just the request. It was the complete lack of accountability. She wasn't there to apologize or to reconnect. She was there because she needed something, and I was convenient. When I told her that, she blew up. She accused me of being cruel, of holding grudges and tearing the family apart. Family. That word made me laugh out loud. I asked her where that sense of family was when I was 16 and sleeping on my grandparents' couch, working nights just to keep my head above water. By the time they left, the air between us was practically vibrating with tension. She made one last attempt to guilt trip me, saying, "I thought you'd be better than this." I just shook my head and told her, "You made your choices. Now you live with them." When the door finally closed behind them, I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I realized then that this wasn't about reconnecting or fixing anything. It was about her, just like it had always been. For her, I wasn't a son. I was a means to an end. That was the last time I let myself hope for anything more. After my mother and Harry's first visit, I thought that would be the end of it. I had been clear, firm, and maybe even a little harsher than I intended, but I thought I'd made my point. I was wrong. A week later, I started getting emails from my mother. At first, they seemed like a weird mix of guilt trips and attempts to rewrite history. She'd write things like, "I raised you all by myself and this is how you repay me," or "You wouldn't be where you are today without everything I sacrificed for you." I ignored them at first. Honestly, I didn't think it was worth engaging. But then the emails started coming more frequently. Every other day, sometimes multiple times a day. She'd send long paragraphs detailing all the hardships she went through raising me, followed by pleas for me to do the right thing and pay for my half-brother's education. It was exhausting. I didn't even know what her end game was. Did she really think this was going to guilt me into giving her money? After a few weeks of this, I snapped. I wrote back a single email laying everything out. I told her that she had no right to demand anything from me, especially after abandoning me the way she did. I reminded her that when I needed her, she chose her new family over me. I made it clear that I wasn't going to pay for my half-brother's college and that she needed to stop contacting me. Predictably, she didn't take it well. She replied almost immediately, calling me selfish and cruel and saying I was making her out to be a villain when all she ever wanted was to give me a good life. It got worse after that. One day, my receptionist at work called me saying my mother had shown up at the office demanding to see me. Thankfully, I wasn't there that day, so she didn't get far. But the fact that she even tried was unsettling. I had to get on the phone with her to tell her to leave my workplace alone. I was calm, but I made it clear that if she tried anything like that again, I'd consider legal action. That seemed to scare her off for a while, at least. But then, about a month later, she escalated things further. I came home one evening to find her waiting outside my apartment building. I could feel the tension building before she even said a word. As I walked up, she started shouting at me, demanding that I talk to her. I told her to leave and that I wasn't interested in another argument. That's when she did something I never expected. She lunged at me. She shoved me hard enough that I fell backward and my phone flew out of my hand. I was in complete shock. Before I could even process what was happening, she started hitting me, screaming about how everything in her life had gone wrong because of me. Luckily, a couple of neighbors heard the commotion and came running. They held her back while someone else called the police. When the police arrived, I made the decision to press charges. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but at that point, I felt like I had no choice. She had crossed every boundary I tried to set, and couldn't keep letting her invade my life like this. I also filed for a restraining order which my lawyer assured me would go through given the circumstances. That night, as I sat in my apartment, bruised and shaken, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Part of me was angry, furious, really, that she had the audacity to show up and attack me after everything she'd already put me through. Another part of me felt a strange kind of relief, like this was the moment I finally saw her for who she truly was. Someone who would never change, no matter how much I wanted her to. The next day, I called my grandparents and my uncle to let them know what had happened. Both of them were horrified, though not entirely surprised. My grandparents offered to speak to her, but I told them not to bother. It was clear by now that there was no reasoning with her. This wasn't about reconciling or mending broken relationships. It was about control, and I wasn't going to let her have it. From that moment on, I decided I was done. No more second chances, no more opportunities for her to worm her way back into my life. I had tried to be patient, to hear her out, even to forgive her in some way. But she had pushed every limit, and now it was time to draw a hard line. After the incident outside my apartment, I realized there was no going back. The restraining order came through quickly, which gave me some peace of mind, but the damage had already been done. Any lingering hope I had for reconciliation, for even a shred of understanding from my mother, was gone. She had shown me time and again that I was nothing more than a means to an end in her eyes. I decided to take action to fully close this chapter of my life. The first thing I did was start looking for a new place to live. I had been considering moving to a bigger apartment for a while, and this was the final push I needed. I didn't want her to know where I lived anymore. I wanted a fresh start, physically and emotionally. A place where I could truly feel safe and leave all of this behind. The process of finding a new home was both exciting and bittersweet. On one hand, I was proud of the life I'd built. I was finally in a position where I could afford something nicer, something I'd worked hard for. On the other hand, every step of the process reminded me why I was doing this in the first place. The thought that my own mother had made me feel unsafe in my own home, it was a tough pill to swallow. While I was packing up my old apartment, she tried to reach out again. Despite the restraining order, she sent emails from new accounts, trying to bypass every block I set up. Her tone varied wildly. Some messages were full of guilt-tripping and accusations, while others were almost pleading. "I gave you everything I had," she wrote in one email, as if that erased the years of abandonment and manipulation. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say. The final straw came when she showed up at my grandparents' house demanding that they intervene on her behalf. From what they told me, it wasn't pretty. She accused them of turning me against her and even tried to guilt them into giving her money. That was the breaking point for them. They told her they couldn't continue a relationship with someone who had caused so much harm, even if she was their daughter. It broke their hearts, but they stood by me. In the weeks that followed, I moved into my new home, set up fresh boundaries, and made it clear to everyone in my circle that I didn't want any updates about her. My uncle, my grandparents, and my friends all respected my decision. They saw how much this had drained me, how much it had cost me emotionally, and they supported me in cutting ties completely. The thing is, I don't hate my mother. I don't think I ever could. But I don't love her either. Not in the way you're supposed to love a parent. What I feel for her now is emptiness. I've spent so much of my life trying to make sense of her actions, trying to understand why I wasn't enough for her. And I've come to realize that it's not about me. It never was. Her choices, her actions, they're a reflection of who she is, not who I am. Moving forward, I've decided to focus on the people who have been there for me. My grandparents, who gave me a home when no one else would. My uncle, who helped me get through college. My friends, who became my chosen family. They are the ones who matter. They are the ones who showed me that family isn't about blood. It's about love, support, and showing up when it counts. As for my mother, I hope she finds peace someday, but I won't be a part of that journey. I've spent too much time trying to carry the weight of her choices, and I'm done. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Free to live on my terms, free to define my own future, and free from the shadow of someone who never truly valued me. This is the closure I never thought I'd have, and honestly, it feels good. Not perfect, not without scars, but good. And that's enough.